Perfect. All right. Well, I guess we should get started then. Welcome to Tree Root Bridges. This is going to be done in 3 parts by me at the beginning, and then Jeff Dadisman from Brookhaven, he's their city arborist, and then Christie Bryant, who is with or owns Speaking for Trees. So away we go. All right, so what is a root bridge? Well, that's a good question. So a root bridge basically is any structure that allows tree roots to be crossed in order to prevent compaction. It reduces the weight of the objects crossing the roots of the tree, by spreading the weight load or spanning the area of those roots. They can be temporary in nature, they can be permanent in nature, but all of them should allow for water to still access those roots, and there's ways to do that. They can be constructed by a variety of materials: plywood, mulch, rubber mat, steel, concrete, plastic, rock, anything that's going to spread that weight out. There are even permanent systems available for purchase, and there's concrete systems poured in place. And we'll try and touch on a little bit of all of that. So where are you going to put a root bridge? Well, you're really going to use this in an area where you're going to be going past or over the top of tree roots. So at the top of the diagram, you see the green arrow saying the area to be protected is the span across the root zone, right, horizontally, because you're trying not to compact that area if you're having to get materials back across the tree roots that you're trying to save, or you're installing a sidewalk. The image below where it says root bridge and it's outlined in orange, that's really where you're going to lay that root bridge for access, and you're looking down at the top of the tree. Okay, so the white dot in the center is your trunk, and of course we all know the spider web of roots that goes out from there. So you're really positioning your root bridge to where materials, people, vehicles, it depends on the situation, are being able to cross that tree that you're trying to save and not compact and affect the root zone by using the root bridge. So basically the first rule is, with any root bridge system, you're trying to prevent soil compaction. We all remember the classes that we've taken where, you compact the soil, it reduces the air space in the soil, and the water spaces in the soil. So now the tree can't draw water because you blocked up the end of the straw by crushing all the little spaces it needed in the root system to draw air, right? So where you're fencing out, where you're tree fencing construction traffic out of a tree root area is not possible, this is where you'd want to use a temporary bridge, right? You could use wood mulch, gravel, with boards laid on top that would spread that weight of the vehicle and the people out, so we're not compacting around the tree roots. The example on the bottom here, basically you're laying out on this one steel plates, and then underneath the steel plates is railroad ties spread out so that they are the place where the heavier impaction is going to be. And as an arborist, you decide where you're placing those, kind of looking at where the main flares or the roots, the structural roots, are coming off of the base of the tree, right? And you're positioning those railroad ties and then laying the steel plate or plywood on top of that. So that's how you start on a temporary bridge. Some tree protection ordinances now require root bridges to be used in construction to try and save those specimen trees or landmark trees, or just a really beautiful tree that is going to actually up the value of the house. So this is language taken right out of a tree protection ordinance, which is in tree save areas where large equipment is operating, a temporary bridge over the root system of the tree shall be constructed. So in this jurisdiction, they're actually making you do this if you're going to be anywhere in that tree that's being saved's critical root zone. And it's giving you the options of using, including but not limited to, construction mats, landscape timbers, or plywood, right? It also is requiring in this code an area of the bridge will typically adhere to the area under the drip line for all trees. And then the temporary bridge detail must be included on the tree protection and replacement plan. So it's not enough to just say, yeah, we're going to use a tree root bridge. For this jurisdiction, you actually have to spec it out and put a detail on the plan. I know there's not a whole lot of details out there, so they're usually things that are created by the arborist, maybe in conjunction with the site designer, right, or the engineer or the landscape architect. But an arborist really needs to be involved in that process. And so, like I said, you're going to run into this where jurisdictions are going to start requiring that you put on the plans how you propose to do this root bridge. So here are some looks at some temporary measures that can be installed. At the bottom, you see the Spartan mat. Those are prefabricated. I think those are the steel mats. And then on the left, you have log mats that are constructed. I've even had people use the pallet wood, you know, if it's just for like an area where somebody's going to be going over with a small piece of equipment, or maybe a guy with a wheelbarrow who's taking stuff back into the back, you know, materials, bricks, cement, whatever, and using that. It's still going to help, especially if it's got mulch underneath that. So they don't have to be expensive, I guess, is the bottom line. Then you have like construct your own. So on this log mat, I mean, they're using, you know, 4x10 by 12s, but realistically, you could also use like a 2x4x12 and, you know, do your spacing a little bit different to create your own temporary bridges. And even if you use the 2x4x12s, the cost of that, I mean, right now they're averaging about $12.23 a stick. So you're talking about 18. Let's say you did 20 of them, you're looking at about $244.60 just to create a root bridge. That's not so bad when you're dealing with the loss of a huge tree, right? Keeping a nice looking specimen tree, or, you know, even a younger tree that you know, is really going to do good and is doing well. You want to keep it doing good and doing well. So this is a way to avoid that impaction, and it's not expensive. You could even do it really out of leftover construction materials if that's all you had, you know, and Lord knows they generate a lot of that on these construction sites. Well, let's keep it out of the landfill, you know. Then you have other temporary examples. They have the steel and rubber mats that you can buy pre-made. Alterna mats is one of those products, and they range at the highest end for a 4x8 size mat for about $297. And remember, these are reusable. So it's something that you're going to be able to use over and over again for a one-time investment. All the way down to a 2x4 size mat that is $89 a piece. The wood pallets, let's face it, you can get wood pallets for free nowadays. Just look around on any curb or behind any shopping center. There's even guys online trying to get rid of these things for free. If they're not being turned into biochar, which is another great way to recycle them. Anyway, I digress. So the final example on this page is a plastic. Now this is new, and it's called a FOD, F-O-D-S, FODs, or FODs. I guess it's FODs, F-O-D-S, mod. Yeah, okay, FODs. So it's a composite plastic HDPE, and it's pre-made, and you just set these tracks out. They come in these pre-done sheets, right? And you can only buy them in a pack of 8, but if you're a large construction company, or you're working for a large construction company, it's gonna have to keep putting in construction exit rock. You can use them as temporary root bridges. You can use them as construction exits. So it ends up saving you a lot of money in the long run because you can use it over and over and over again. I think the initial outlay for rock for just a 20x50 construction exit, if you were going to try and put one over and make that work as your span over your tree root system, maybe you've got an exit coming in between 2 trees. You could use this product, and then the buyer, builder, or developer could use it over and over again. The initial outlay on his rock plus all the construction refresh and removing it at the end phase and making it look good, it's going to run them about $6,400 for that one construction exit for 1 year. And then the cost of these FODs is $2,900 well, basically about $3,000 for one. You can only buy them in a pack of 8. And I know you're thinking, hey, Kay, that's a $23,000 layout, $24,000 layout. Yeah, but if he's going to be able to use it over and over again for all his projects for the next 3 years, he saves $65,000. You know, to me, it's a no-brainer. Plus, it keeps stuff out of the landfill, right? This is recycled plastic. And when it finally dies, and they're saying it's a 10-year product, you know, you're looking at being able to recycle it again. So I think that's a win-win. But anyway, so here's a little bit better look at that FODs track out control mat, just so you can see what it looks like. And like I said, they give you 8 of them. You're going to be using those as a construction exit. You can use them as root bridging. And that's the cost of them, and that's where you can order them from. And they are available here in the US and in Georgia. So I think the manufacturer of them is in Colorado, if memory serves me. But anyway, new product in the market, and I think it's going to end up helping us out a lot in the construction industry. Brittany, do you have something?
I do. Naomi had a question that we use modular ground production mats. You categorize the pre-made mats using that terminology. They come with an overlap as well as ramp modules to facilitate excavators getting on and off.
Yep. So thank you for that. All the additional information we can definitely use. Yeah, so, but that was I think that was the Alterna mats that they were talking about, right? Yeah, okay. So going on, let's see, permanent root bridges. Okay, so bridging over roots, I mean, let's face it, sometimes these roots are too large, and especially on these street trees, the roots are too large to cut, and you really have expanded, they've expanded up above the natural grade, of course, because they're in, near the street, near compaction, they can't go down, so they're popping up, right? In those cases, you can bridge the root by creating a slight rise in a driveway, a sidewalk, where it passes over the root system. You can use things like reinforced concrete. When you use reinforced concrete, here's the trick with that. You have to use rebar or wire mesh in pouring that concrete because it's going to make it stronger. And it's really important when you're doing slabs over the top of a root system that you're rebarring them together so that there's not just one single slab. You're linking all the slabs together with the rebar, and that way the tree really has to push against 2, 3, 4 slabs rather than one, because it's so easy for them to pop that one slab up, right? But when they're all working as a team, then it keeps it from pushing so much and popping up just one slab. So that's the trick that a lot of municipalities I know that I've worked for haven't used the reinforcement in that concrete. They're just pouring concrete. They're not putting wire mesh. They're not putting rebar. And then they're getting exactly what we're talking about, that one panel popped up, right? So it makes a difference in how you prep this stuff, right? So here's some examples. The one on the left is the raised metal poured right over a root bridge system that was created in DeKalb County for a project over, I think this one's off La Vista Road or in that area. And then to the right, you have cement and steel that's been utilized to bridge the large root that was there. And you can see it's where the root's already popping the concrete there too on the curbing. But the tree is doing well, so rather than just remove the tree because you had to put in a sidewalk, these options were taken so that you could bridge over that root system and keep the tree. And I believe that one in DeKalb is still there, and that had to have been done 20 plus years ago. So it's still functioning. All right, here's another example. Bridging over tree roots, like I said, can take many forms. This is an example that was designed by Arbor Guard. It uses a stay-lite aggregate, and which stay-lite is an aggregate made by heating and expanding shale, and the rock splits and pops like popcorn and becomes a really lightweight, compactable stone that's porous, right? So they did this project created this when they did the project for the Atlanta Botanical Gardens here. And they ended up using the stay-lite as the base, and then compacted it enough, got the retaining wall put in there, and then put on top of that with paver systems so that you still have water that's able to penetrate and get to the root systems, but it kept the roots from being compacted by using that stay-lite material. So that is another way you can do a root bridge. And this was the diagram that they used for that. And the trees are doing well. The system is working well. And that was done, like I said, that had to be another one that was done, 15, 20 years ago. So these things work, but you really have to make sure you follow how they're spec'd out. This is a great system that they've created in the UK. I'm hoping it comes here soon. This is the Green Grid systems. And this is they've got different weight varieties for this, but they all base themselves on the screw, the ground screw that goes in. Well, you can see on the left, the long cylindrical ground screws that are put in, screwed into the ground. So you're not digging, you're just twisting the screw in, right? And then you're putting on sheets of, or bars of metal on top of that iron fabric welding stuff. Gosh, I can't talk today. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. It's a framework of metal that lays over the top of that and attaches to those screws. And then on top of that, there's a grid. And on top of that, you can either pour cement, pervious cement, or you can do the pervious pavers. And you can see in the example on the right, this all started with those little screws growing in the ground and the metal frame underneath it. And then on top of that, you see where they put in the pavers. And it's all to clear the space. It actually leaves a void. So these can be adjusted in height. And they sell these ground screws here in the US too. This particular product system isn't here yet that I'm aware of. I couldn't find a manufacturer. I'm sure it will be here soon. They kind of be ahead of us. They're ahead of us a lot of times in Europe. And I know we have someone on from overseas, so welcome. And you may have seen this system in place already over there, but this is new to us here in the US. So just know that this is coming, guys. And like I said, there are already some of these ground screws that you can get on Amazon. They're not even that expensive. I think it's like 40 some odd dollars. And you can order these systems from Amazon for a no dig ground anchor, black U model screw with a post stake holder on the top. So like these applications where they're wanting to put a deck near a tree, you could screw in this ground screw that's got the anchor already built on top of it for the wood post. And you're hooking that wood post in and screwing it into that anchor bolt. So you're not having to dig a piered footing. You're just using the screw. I think it's a brilliant idea. And it's about time somebody started using those to protect our trees. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now, and I'm going to turn it over to our next presenter, Jeff, and he is going to do some case studies for us.
Great. Thanks, Kay, so much. I want to address a couple of comments or questions real fast. So
Sure.
Naomi said, actually, Europe, it's not at all ahead of the US and Canada. Only UK has a functional arboriculture community. Thanks for that input.
Thank you. I just meant the technology, sorry.
Anonymous and said, talk about the use of geotextiles designed to distribute loading beneath solid or porous materials while admitting air and water penetration. Is that something that's going to be covered later, or?
I don't know if Jeff has that in his study, but yeah, you can use the geotextiles too, especially if you're doing a temporary bridge. So you would lay a geotextile fabric down first and then use your mulch or your rock and then the plywood on top of that. And it really helps with cleanup. You don't want to use something like a jute mat with that because the jute just breaks down. And remember, these measures are temporary. So, you know, unless you're going to be setting up a permanent system, you really wouldn't want to use a temporary fabric underneath your rock and mulch that you would have to then take off and put down whatever you're going to have to put down afterward. The mulch may be, if it's just a temporary mulch bridge, you could spread that out, but the rock you're not going to want to leave in place. So.
Okay. Last one, and I've already given you control so that you can take over, Jeff, and get set up. But Brian wants to know, can the screw be used in freeze thaw areas like Wisconsin?
Well, I mean, they did this and started using it in the UK, and they haven't had any trouble with it over there, I'm guessing. So these are pretty long. The screws go about 6 feet. They're using them over there in 6 foot lengths or more. And they're going down into chalk soils. So like I said, I haven't really heard of any here in the US being used, but I mean, you can get the data from like helical piers for our area and probably other areas in the country. I would think where it's longer, the longer screws would be used for things like, you know, probably sandy soils and things like that. But, you know, just know that that technology is there and it's coming. And, you know, so there you go.
Thank you so much, Kay. All right,
welcome.
I'm gonna push it on over to you, Jeff.
All right. Hey, everybody, good evening. I want to make sure that you all can see the right screen. So is everybody on the case study slide?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right, good deal. All right, so thank you, Kay. To kind of go off her part of the discussion. My two case studies are both projects for single-family residential infill construction projects here in Brookhaven, Georgia, and the focus on root bridging, or really, I feel like the more appropriate term for my two case studies is floating concrete sidewalks and driveways. So the focus is going to be a little bit more on minimizing impact and protecting tree roots, critical root zones for permanent developmental requirements. All right, so to give you a little bit of context for virtually every single family residential site plan that I'm the main reviewer for most of the developmental permits here in Brookhaven, and it's within the perimeter of the city of Atlanta, for those of you who aren't familiar. So virtually all of this is tear down, rebuild. There are very little true just undeveloped wooded land spaces anywhere in my jurisdiction, and the building market was really hot when I started a little over 2 years ago, and it's still got plenty of momentum. So to give you a little bit of context, for an 11 square mile jurisdiction, we have roughly over 400 active just single family residential new house construction projects active at this time, with plenty more under review. So kind of what I have to deal with, and where root bridging really became a valuable tool in the toolkit, is kind of that inherent tug of war for any, certainly for any municipal arborist who's chimed in here. It's that inherent kind of tug of war you have. Maybe not, maybe you're lucky, but I know with our public works department and the Brookhaven master plan to just kind of increase connectivity and pedestrianism, is to actually require the construction or the resurfacing, if there's something already there, for curbing, landscape strip, and sidewalk for any developmental project that kind of coincides with the master plan for building out the sidewalk network. So any commercial lot, any single family residential lot that falls into any of those overlays, which is a good portion of the city, when it goes in for permitting, the sidewalk installation or repair / resurfacing is triggered at that point. So there's that requirement going on, but then there's, Brookhaven is a jurisdiction with a strong tree protection and preservation ordinance, with a major emphasis being the preservation of street trees, right-of-way trees, and for good reason, right? Asphalt surfaces in an urban environment are one of the single hottest parts of that already, an environment that already has the urban heat island, and casting shade over asphalt is kind of a critical piece of the puzzle in terms of mitigating the urban heat island and just creating, the better streetscapes. And another huge benefit is, at least in Atlanta, there are areas that are prone to flooding and have flooding problems. The streets are typically the most pronounced area for those flooding events. So obviously, as probably everybody on this call knows, tree roots and really vegetation type, they guarantee more pervious area, but then they're incredibly effective at mitigating what would otherwise be more exaggerated stormwater flooding. So some really solid reasons to try to preserve all of these right-of-way trees, even in the face of these other developmental requirements, such as, at least in Brookhaven, building out the the sidewalk master plan. So the image on the left, this is, I wanted to show this. A few of these do exist in Brookhaven, and it was mentioned early on in the presentation. Kay was the original arborist for Brookhaven when it was incorporated into a city in 2012. And I was asking her today, she at least sounded like she's pretty sure she was actually involved in the construction of the few truly elevated wood root bridges that we have within our city. There's only 2 or 3. And of course, this is the ideal. If you have to meet a sidewalk requirement and there's a right-of-way tree where where the attempt is to preserve that tree, this is the ideal in terms of mitigating and minimizing tree impact. However, the photo on the right is really, this is the standard specification for the sidewalk requirements in Brookhaven. And this tends to be this is definitely the strong preference from our Public Works Department. It tends to be the preference for planning and zoning for commercial streetscapes, and it tends to be the preference for property owners. So, whereas the wood bridge is fairly ideal for just strictly in terms of tree health, the photo on the right is much more accurate portrayal of the type of streetscape infrastructure that I have to navigate, in conjunction with tree preservation and responsible arboriculture, right? So our specs, everyone in Brookhaven, the curbing is granite. And if you've never seen this stuff installed or reinstalled, it is the 6 inches above ground that you can see that make up the visible part of the curb. It's incredibly deep. It goes almost 18 to 24 inches into the ground. It varies a little bit. But these are massive slabs of granite. And every time a permit triggers resetting of the granite curb. So Brookhaven originally, there's a lot of properties where the frontage still has the original granite curbing. So in those instances, our Public Works Department just requires that the builder developer find a way to just raise and reset the granite curbing, because it does start to sag, and it can dip as low as basically at grade with the street in certain situations. So they're required to basically excavate it, replace it if it's determined it's just too weathered and that's what's needed, or reset it back to the full 6 inches above grade. Behind the curb, you have a 2-foot landscape strip, and then abutting that is this is our standard width for our concrete sidewalks. So I'm going to focus on just 2 case studies. The first one was basically a single family residential infill involving 2 different lots and 6 trees, all of which were in the right of way. And then the second case study is focusing on single family residential infill on 1 corner lot involving 1 cherry bark oak right at the corner of that lot. So I'll give you a little bit of context. Kay did an awesome job of kind of explaining some of the BMPs and some of the options you have and the technologies and materials you have. And I'll get a little bit into, okay, well, what leads to that, in terms of the review process, because I think we'd all agree the average builder or developer, they don't come into a site just automatically thinking about tree health. They might be okay with, on paper, not cutting a tree down, whether their client wants it or whether the jurisdiction wants it, but you still have to make sure that it's not just a paper exercise and that the tree is sufficiently protected. And this is where it can get really tricky, because they're having and this case study, here's a perfect example. I mean, they had to thread the needle here to meet all the other developmental requirements and sufficiently protect and kind of minimize the impact on these trees. So just a little bit of description of like the pre-existing conditions of the site before anything was permitted and construction started. What you can see in this picture are 4 water oaks, basically right up against one of our neighborhood streets. So I said 6 trees, sorry, I think it's 5. And then behind me, from where I took this picture, is a 5th southern red oak. All these trees, you know, listed off the DBH just so you could kind of get an idea of the sizes we were dealing with in here. And I would rate at the time, you know, we made sure that the trees were basically worth the effort, right? I mean, there are a lot of trees that simply just need to be removed based on their condition. So I think it's critically important to assess each tree or, you know, the tree under discussion and make sure that it's worth the effort before you go through with attempting to preserve a tree. I would rate all these in fair condition, largely just due to the fact that the structural root plate on one side is essentially abutting the road. Some of the older, larger trees along this stretch had some decay in the crown, you know, mild to moderate decay, some dead wood, but beyond that, no cavities, no fruiting bodies of any kind. So one huge variable. Then you have to kind of get into the nitty gritty with some other stuff. So one thing that we noticed on the site when I was meeting with the builder is, you know, trees often can kind of like self-mound, right, and create these upward contours relative to, you know, all the surrounding grade. And that was certainly the case here. So from where you can see the smaller arrow coming up to kind of the bottom of the root flare, you had about a 12-inch, about a 1 foot grade change. And knowing that we were going to meander the sidewalk from corner here down to the corner out of sight here behind the trees, the builder felt like it would be, you know, they would have to do zero cut grading, and if he could bring in a certain amount of fill just to level things out, and then get started on the base aggregate layer for pouring the concrete, for floating the concrete, it would probably be a viable option and actually get his grade the way he wanted it for his driveways to the frontages of the 2 homes. So, you know, that particular site variable kind of played in our favor as well. One thing I stressed that I'll get into a little bit later is, okay, but the fill cannot be subsoil. It cannot be the super dense red Georgia clay. It's got to be no more than 4 or 5 inches of topsoil. And please call me when it arrives, because I want to see it before you dump it. And the builder did that. And I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. I'm bad about remembering to take pictures on site, but I do have at least one during picture for this project. But you know, this is the site plan that I reviewed and eventually approved. It's I don't love it, but at the end of the day, it's and when I say that, really what I'm getting at is usually I require the entire structural root plate, which is the smaller circles, to be completely protected. Zero construction activity, which again is the ideal, right? Okay, reference that code section from an ordinance, you know, saying you have to have a root bridge if you're going through a tree protection area, which again, you're as a municipal arborist who's reviewing these site plans, working with these builders, it's you gotta navigate so many different requirements that's not all possible. And of course, we know the ideal is just tree protection area is the tree protection area, and nothing happens in there, including operating heavy equipment. So this was one where just realistically, there was not going to be sufficient. There wasn't going to be tree fence. We weren't going to be able to have it installed around all the structural root plate, and even most of the critical root zone, which is shown by the larger circles here. We were just going to have to thread the needle and communicate with the builders a lot and do multiple rounds of kind of on-site supervision for different phases of construction. So, but you can see, you know, obviously in my review, I had them add plenty of notes. So a few things that I wanted them to include on the site plan was to be exempt from resetting the curb, because 3 of these trees literally had buttress roots, like, you know, engulfing the curb. They were calloused over the curbing. So it kind of went without saying that they were going to be exempt from that. And they were obviously able to, and when I say able, I have these conversations with our public works department. Hey, they're going to have to meander a little bit. They're going to have to go behind the trees. We got to have a little flexibility on this one. And as long as they could show that they could do that and stay in the right of way, because City of Brookhaven likes all of their sidewalks, all of their infrastructure to stay in the right of way. But they don't like to have to acquire more right of way space to certainly save a tree. So again, I'm kind of having to navigate that. So we were able to pull it off. So this here is basically the right of way marker. So for this lot, you can see where the actual 5-foot sidewalk is going. It's just right up against that property line between city right of way and the actual lot here. So the picture on the left shows they call me. These builders are great. A few of these guys actually do some timber management in South Georgia. So in the world of builders, they're a little more cognizant of trees than I guess the average builder. So they were a pleasure to work with for this job, certainly for the most part. So they called me when the fill soil arrived for that, you know, kind of depressed area. I came out, I looked at the soil, so okay, I mean, you can see it. If you know Georgia soil, then you know that that's not, you know, the red clay, it's not the subsoil, it's actual topsoil that they brought in, which was good. And it, you know, one thing I'll say too is we did some digging around here, and these buttress roots, they really dove. They did not come out this way. So I felt like it was a pretty reasonable approach to allow for them to bring in about 4 inches of topsoil, just to bring this grade up a little bit. We also allowed them, you can see here, we allowed them to pour their driveways pretty early on, kind of like initial phase of construction. That way they could just go ahead and use those as their 2 construction exits for the 2 lots. And they also built those driveways almost completely on top of what the existing old driveway footprints were. So again, I felt like there was very little tree root impact going on there. They also wanted to go ahead and pour their driveways early on to know how to kind of contour this and really match grade when they actually went to float this sidewalk that they were being required to install within the scope of building these 2 homes. So the picture on the right is basically finished product. It's what it looks like today. Ended up being about a 200-foot stretch of concrete with some meandering. They, over that topsoil, they basically just put their forms in on each side and poured 57 stone as the aggregate base, put down some filter fabric and did their pour. I'm sorry, I think it's the other way around. Filter fabric, then 57 stone as the aggregate base, and then they just did a float right on top of that. I wish I could say, you know, Kay made a really good point. I wish I could say that this was reinforced concrete. I have a feeling it's not. The second case study, I know it is, but I have a feeling this was not reinforced concrete, because that's, I think it's a situational requirement from our public works department. And yeah, at the time, I just didn't know that was probably a BMP there. So, but it's a full 4 inches of concrete that was floated, 0 cut grading occurred on site. My concern here is just the lack of tree protection, and there was just no way to realistically do it. It was up at times during construction, but they had to bring it down for the driveways, and they had to bring it down for the sidewalk. And that there was encroachment that I typically would not be comfortable with. However, these builders communicated well, and they had their concrete contractors do a careful job in there. So I will say that this one I would say is mixed results. I can go ahead and tell you everyone that the largest, oldest water oak, which is the fourth one down here, it appears to be failing. So it arguably should have just been removed before construction. That was the one I was less sure about. And I'm in the process of lining up a removal for that tree. It's an active failure. The other 4 trees appear to be in good health, especially the 2 younger, smaller ones, big surprise. But I think, these trees need to be monitored. I'm not willing to call it more of a success than a failed project yet. I definitely think that the 2 smaller, younger ones will be just fine. And as well as the large southern red oak down here on the corner. Some other recommendations and, some other just items to hit on for this project. Before anything started, coordinated tree care prescriptions for all 5 trees, which for this was kind of like the works. The only thing we didn't decide to go with here was plant growth regulator, but we did some clearance pruning, some deadwood pruning, pre and post soil air fracturing, liquid biostimulants, humates injections, and wood borer suppression trunk sprays during the entire course of the construction project.
Jeff,
Yep.
can I ask a quick question for Naomi?
Yeah.
She was wondering if you considered requiring them to do a substrate retrofit underneath the driveway, consisting of CU soil to reduce the need for compaction.
What is CU soil?
Naomi, can you clarify in the Q&A for me? Structural soil, she says.
Oh, it's a good thought. It would probably be a good thing to do. It's hard to retroactively. The driveways were floated too. So, but to your point, there was no doubt some level of compaction. Because as you kind of came back up on the other side of that depression that I showed in this picture here, they kind of got back to just the existing grade and the existing soil. So of course it would be better. We did, the air fracturing and the liquid injections, they came all the way out to the drip line. So even this area out here is all treated pre and post con, which certainly mitigates things, but that's a good point. And another thing I'll say is Kay mentioned it, Stay-Lite or Permatil is another trade name for it. If anyone on this call is not utilize that and you work in an area of clay soil, it's tremendous. It's great for vertical mulching. It's great as a base layer for these types of projects. Just a clay buster, if you actually till it in, it's a wonderful product. So I guess I say that to say in the future, especially for a project like this, where it's a long stretch involving multiple trees that are in fair condition, it would probably also be better to require the use of Stay-Lite or a more porous aggregate than just 57 stone. All right, I'll try to quicken it up a little bit. I'm sorry if I'm being wordy here. All right, so the second project, it went really well, and this is partly because, as you can see on the site plan, it just with the orientation of the tree to the rest of the site, it was just easier to have good tree protection for the duration of construction. This is a different builder, also just really good to work with. with tree protections on his projects. And this is one where this tree protection fence, you can see here, it was honored for the entirety of construction, which it's hard to pull off. We deal with encroachment all the time. I'm sure we're not the only ones. But this tree fence stayed exactly where you're seeing it here during the entirety of construction. I'll tell myself I'd use a street view image here because I didn't take any pictures before we got going on constructing the actual sidewalk. But I think it's a good shot because it shows, right in the middle of, it shows conditions right in the middle of construction. And it shows that the tree protection fence is exactly where it's supposed to be, part of the site plan here. So this is one where I took a special interest in also because it's a right-of-way tree. But Jesse Milton, who I believe's sitting in on this, he was the consulting arborist for the builder on this project. And Jesse and I work a lot with each other. We coordinate a lot of things. And this guy looks at a lot of trees. And when Jesse calls and he's impressed by a tree that he's looking at, you should take notice. So this was one he kind of really put on he emphasized for this site plan here, he put on my radar. He said, this is a neighborhood tree. It's really worth, putting in some extra effort on. So you can see all my special notes here on the approved site plan again, handwork only, float the sidewalk. This is one, and again, it's about looking at the finer details and what your options are and making sure it's a viable option. So this picture here, you can't see it very clearly, but the curbing was low here. And the builders, due to the public works requirement, they were going to have to reset that curbing back to a full 6 inches. And I saw an opportunity there to actually, if they were going to have to bring that grade back up 6 inches, well, that's your form on that side. And we could pour against the back of that curb, and that would give us that new grade to just be able to float right over the roots, the structural root play of this tree without any type of major impact, certainly no cutting. But you had to get into the execution, right? Because if you've ever seen this done, these guys will usually excavate about 2 feet off the back of the curb just to be able to get equipment in there and lift these massive slabs of granite. And I said, okay, yeah, I think we can pull this off if y'all can find a way to only dig back several inches and basically grapple it and kind of like extract it out of the ground and set it back to grade that way with minimal excavation behind the curb towards the tree. And that was kind of discussed on this site visit here with the builder. We're taking measurements, looking at, what our 5 foot width is going to be from back of curb here. And they found a way to do it. They basically just hand dug about 6 inches back here. They put a grapple on a skid steer and just kind of bit the top of that curb and wiggled it loose one slab at a time and pulled that out. And they actually just put new granite curbing in, same width and everything at the proper 6 inches, which you can see how low the curb is here. So it took us from like 1 inch above the grade of the road back to 6. That allowed us to be able to pour the concrete, float the concrete from the top of the new curb over here 5 feet with virtually no impact. And these guys did it in 2 days. The tree fence was up the entire time until they had to get in there and do it. They put it right back up after they were done. And this is the finished product here. On this side, ramping back to the road. And this was a picture that I took about a month ago before a leaf drop. And the tree's doing well. This one here, the tree care plan, because the tree protection during construction was just so much easier to pull off and it was honored the whole time. The tree care was pretty light. We just did some deadwood pruning, vehicle clearance pruning, just cut some tips off over the road, did air fracturing, post-con, and this tree's looking great. Of course, in all these projects, it's like the key is to continue to monitor because construction impact can rear its ugly head sometimes it takes 3 years, sometimes it takes 5. We know that sometimes it takes a long time, but this was a project I felt like really went well. And the other thing I'll note is, again, it's if you're a municipal arborist, I just had a conversation with Public Works, and this is one where they were willing to allow the builder to be exempt from the 2-foot landscape strip here to bump everything out away from the tree. So some quick conclusions. Site conditions and tree, the orientation of a tree or trees that you're trying to preserve and bridge over relative to everything else on the site and what the proposed work is, I think is critical, right? And I think my first case study, which there's one tree failure, kind of mixed results compared to the second case study. I think it's a good comparison. Make sure it's not just a paper exercise, right? Can it really be pulled off in the field? The pre-construction, health of the trees, have the trees assessed before, basically when a site is under review, right? That's when you need to figure out, well, is this even worth it? In Brookhaven, if Christie, Bryant, or Jesse Milton or whoever assesses a tree to be in poor condition associated with a developmental permit, we actually require its removal, because I don't think it's a good idea to allow a tree that's already assessed to be in poor condition to be impacted even further and expect things to go well. But again, the water oak, especially the 41-inch for the first case study, I have a feeling it probably would have gone 50-50. There's probably some arborists out there who would have assessed it to be in poor condition just based on some of the dead wood in the crown, but really just the way its root flare was just, abutting the curbing. And, of course, you just have some inherent root system issues going on there. Stability, fibrous root systems probably diminished or non-existent underneath asphalt. So those are definitely some things to look at. And then, it's really just like communication, supervision, especially with the builders, but also with consulting arborists. If you're a municipal arborist that is in a jurisdiction that doesn't require basically the involvement of a consulting arborist, I can't recommend that enough. All right. That's how, none of us have time to go inspect every one of these sites ourselves that come under review. But if you can require builders and developers to have a qualified professional, a certified arborist, registered forester, go out and actually provide you with useful updated tree information, well, your decision making is going to be a lot better. So I think that's all I have.
Hey, awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. I do have a few questions that have piled up for you. But if everybody doesn't mind, sit tight. I will bring those up and after Christie. That way everybody who has to leave on time can get out on time. Okay. Christie, I'm going to go ahead and I've got control. So you just let know when to swap for you and we'll go from there. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I don't have much to go over, but I'm sitting here and as per usual, in every single tree class that I've ever taken, I learned something. I learned that I've been doing tree root bridging way longer than I thought I have, because the first project I worked on was a really cool one where we were putting a tiny house next to, I think it was about a 45-inch water oak in the city of Atlanta down in Grant Park. And so I got to go out and air spade and pick out the location, the potential locations for them to place the piers. I did go back about a year ago. I'd say that project's probably 5 or 6 years old. I did get to go back like a year ago and the tree's still alive and healthy. I'm just like, how long is it going to be before it grows into the roof of the tiny house? But that's not my problem. That's kind of future planning, and I guess something we don't worry about until it happens, probably 10 years from now. But anyway, my first one is that I want to talk about today was just the most simple of projects. There were 2 trees, a ginkgo and a red maple, both in good condition, with some camellias going down the side of the property, and the family wanted a pool. I called them a super cool family because why just call them a family? They could be super and cool. So anyway, one way in and out of the property, no other way to get the stuff back there to let these people have their pool. The first thing we started with was, again, are the trees in good condition? Can they even handle this? Are they or do we just need to remove them? And that makes everybody's life easier as far as getting a pool put in would be. So the next thing was to coordinate with the site planner and make sure that the specs were on the site plan, because if we don't get our say, if we don't get these put on the plan, they don't become a legal document, and there's nothing to hold them to doing that. So we can say we're going to do a tree root bridge all day, but if we don't have these specifications, these details on these plans, there's nothing to help hold them being done. So so the site planner updated that, read the tree care plan the way that myself and Marty Ursery at the City of Atlanta wanted it. And then I looked at it, figured out the impacts, came up with the tree care plan. And then the next step was to communicate with both the pool installer and the homeowner. We had a pretty fun conversation in the front yard. Of course, as if you actually work with people in trees and construction, they think it's crazy the first time that they're told that they have to pay for a prescription on a tree. They're like, what? Huh? Are you serious? But you're like, yep, sure is. Have fun. And you get to prepay it in most municipalities. So, which is the city's way of making sure that the work gets done. So once that's communicated, go ahead, Brittany. Flip. So when that is done, let me move my screen so I can see my own. So once that is done, then we move on to the plan. So again, this is the plan. This is from the top layer. I mean, the top line of my tree care plan. It's 50-inch ginkgo and 12-inch red maple, far right side of the front yard, being impacted by the construction equipment and materials. So again, I'm basically repeating what's written in the details on the site plan. And I'm adding in some extra that, that I would be monitoring, that what would happen with the mulch after. We don't need 12 inches of hardwood mulch laying on top of these tree roots for any longer than we have to. So as soon as construction was completed, we went ahead and made sure that that was spread out. Brittany, you can go down one more, please. This is during construction. And of course, I was out there taking pictures, covering everybody's rear to make sure that it was all done correctly. And then at the completion, I just doubled the amount of the soil injections and checked that that the mulch depth was in fact not too deep to create any root problems. And just there we are. And then if you go down one more, that's the end. So so a year and a half later, there's no signs of tip dieback. They did somebody cruising by with a bobcat bucket, I'm quite sure, because I may have done that once or twice in my landscaping career. They decided to take a little bit of bark off the ginkgo tree. The reaction wood is covering it, and I anticipate absolutely no problems with this project at all. I expect both of these trees to move right on through. That's also a female ginkgo, so that's really fun for the homeowners. In fact, she was like, please just get it gone. And I said, no, you can't. It's over 6 inches and there's nothing wrong with it. It's in the city of Atlanta and it's a front yard setback tree, so it's staying. So her neighbors, I'm sure, will appreciate that when they're walking their dogs. So Brittany, go to the next one, please. All right, so this is a fun one. What happens when we fail? Okay, so when they're just a paper action, or they don't even make it to the paper action, when what I say doesn't get made to the site plan. So this was a situation where a lady called me like 2 weeks ago, and she said, hey, I'm the homeowner. We worked through an expediter, but we just got a violation trying to get our our approval on our pool install, and they're not giving it to us because they're saying there's some impact to a tree that we need to deal with. And we wrote, we paid you a prescription and I need to see what's been done. And I knew immediately that I didn't know the address. I do my own treatments. So even if I don't know the exact date, I do the treatment. I know what's going on with your property. So I didn't recognize the address right on. Of course, I'm in the middle of driving. So I said, you know what, ma'am, let me call you back. So immediately I get back and realize what happened. The words in italics are what was written on my tree care plan, and that part was not done. The 56-inch water oak in the front yard, it wasn't fair condition. No reason, none of the normal white oak stuff or water oak stuff. Good vigor, lacks of common insects and disease. And I specifically said add root detail bridge to site plan 12 inches and gave specifications. Guess what happened? Nothing. They prepaid the prescription. I put it in my hold folder so I could wait till they let me know that they were through permitting. They went ahead and somehow got through permitting. The work didn't happen. The root bridge work did not happen. The tree was therefore impacted, and now we're behind the 8 ball trying to deal with what we're going to do with this tree. Go ahead and switch ones. It's kind of funny because I do have a boundary tree letter and did deal with cryptomerias, just with soil injections the first time out, but nothing with the water oak. It just completely just kind of left everybody's things. So anyway, go to the next thing. And unfortunately I got there like as the leaves fell, but if you can have the ability to zoom in on this picture, you can see that there's lots of gravel. The soil has little cracks and fractures because this was taken with 3 weeks of no rain, and there's definitely some compacted soil. So go to the next slide. The plan is we're basically going to we're going to go back in with soil injections, doubling it. We're going to go ahead and do plant growth regulators, which I had not recommended at the beginning of it because I felt like it wasn't going to be a big deal. It really wasn't going to be a big deal for this tree. And now it potentially could be, especially it being such a large, mature guy. And then I also want to bring this up because this happens constantly with my builders, and it drives me crazy, even when I put it in the site plan, even when I write it in my tree care plan. When we protect a tree for the period of construction, and then the tree safe fence is pulled up and the landscaper runs his tiller through so that he can plant that pretty fescue sod, or they can put their pretty 14 azaleas and 12 flats of pachysandra under our trees is additional impacts. So especially when the impact is high, I will almost always include that nothing but mulch needs to be under the tree for the first 2 years of construction. The first 2 years following construction. And I explain to my clients as much as possible why. These guys have just been hit pretty hard. Let's leave them alone. You just spend all this money to save the tree. Please, can you just implement your planting over the next 4 years instead of planting everything right now? And I know for those of y'all that deal with prescriptions and trees under construction on a daily basis, oftentimes it's the landscaper that causes a violation when there shouldn't have been one. So that's what I have.
Thank
Okay.
you, Christie.
I can run over the last of it if you want, Brittany.
Those last questions, yeah,
Yeah.
having you over here answering questions has been amazing. Thanks, Kay. You just kind of
No
took it and ran
problem.
with it.
No problem. Yeah, y'all just
go for it.
remember on this last slide, add details for the root bridge to your plans. Follow the arborist prescription measures. Have your inspections done daily for temporary bridges. Make sure nobody's knocked it off or whatever if it's a wood structure. And yearly for permanent to make sure there's no cracking, there's no breaking, anything like that, no structural weakness in the steel, your rust. You're looking for all that stuff. And take before how the tree looks before, how the tree looks during. Christie talked about that, and how the tree looks after completion. Because, you know, especially if it's a border tree or a boundary tree, you're going to have to prove the condition the tree was in previously, and that, you know, the work was followed according to your spec during, and then that the tree is still in good condition after. And I really, you know, for me following up, I go a year or two after just to make sure the tree's still in good condition. So that really helpful to document that. And then of course, water, water, water. Tree's not getting water. I don't care what kind of bridging you put over it, it's not going to make it. So that would be it from me. Jeff, why don't you go ahead and answer those couple of questions that they had?
From
Let's see.
James and John.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The first one, James, if you're referring for the first project, the answer is no. And the answer is they should have been. So that was honestly, that project went into permitting when I was very close to brand new as the municipal arborists in Brookhaven. And anybody who does plan review, it's an art as much as anything, right? And you live and you learn. It didn't dawn on me at the time that, well, just because it's a right-of-way tree, it still qualifies as a boundary tree. So they absolutely, had I done the review for those site plans today, absolutely, they would have had to have. The way we do it, it's not so much specifically a bond, which I do like the idea because that's incorporating the actual appraised value of the tree, or it's at least opening the door for that. But our boundary tree agreements, like most of them, they at least require the trees remain healthy and viable for 3 years after issuance of the CO. And the builder assumes full responsibility for removal costs and replacement costs if tree failures occur. So absolutely, they should have been. The second one, yes, they were required to have a boundary tree agreement. Although for that one, you know, that's kind of a tricky one. Everybody, or every ordinance, I guess, they might do their CRZ percent impact calculations a little bit differently, just due to the age of the road and the age of the tree. That was one where I think I was okay with them basically subtracting out all the, you know, CRZ area coinciding with the existing road. So maybe it technically probably wouldn't have been triggered by our ordinance where the threshold is 20%, but I know that they had to produce one anyway. But like I said, they executed well and the tree was protected, and I feel pretty good about that one. For John's question on the first project, what were the costs involved? So I don't know specifically as for the installation, like a floated sidewalk and driveways, but I can answer that question. Generally, from my conversations with the two builders who I dealt with mostly for these projects, it's literally no additional costs because not much changes. It would be an additional cost if pervious concrete was required. That's certainly more expensive, but obviously that'd be better. That'd be an improvement on the specs than just standard concrete. It wasn't required for that project, but from what I understand, just floating concrete without really any of the other specs changing, obviously the price doesn't change. For tree care prescription, that was you had 5 trees with, you know, everything I listed: pre, post con, liquid, soil injections, air fracturing, trunk washes, and some pruning. I could estimate that that totaled around $10,000, and that includes pruning. So reasonable cost in my opinion. And the other thing there is the neighborhood was just absolutely insistent that every effort be made to preserve those street trees. You know, so there was a lot of pressure to try to pull that one off.
Cool. All right. I guess that's pretty much it.
Has any final ones?